Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, jambo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast, coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Readingville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. Have you subscribed to our show yet? Please do. You can find us on the iHeartRadio app, on Google Podcasts, iTunes, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you find your podcast. We have an amazing show for you today. Our guest is a bat expert. Her name is Kristen Lear. This was such a fun conversation for me. It was absolutely fascinating. I absolutely know that you're going to be just as fascinated as I am. And I also know that you and your kids are going to have an amazing time if you join me at the Chicago Toy and Game Fair, November 23rd and 24th at Navy Pier in Chicago. That's right. Your kids will have a chance to play with life-size toys and games from all around the world at the largest toy and game fair in North America, the 17th annual Chicago Toy and Game Fair. Going to give your kids a chance to meet inventors, authors, characters, enjoy interactive stage shows, and so much more. You'll also be able to find out what it's like to be a guest on the Reading with Your Kids podcast at our totally interactive and immersive booth at the Chicago Toy and Game Fair. And check this out. Listeners of the Reading with Your Kids podcast can save $3 by going to shytag.com, CHITAG.com, shytag.com. Buy your tickets using the promo code RWYK. That's the Reading with Your Kids initials, RWYK, at checkout, and you can save $3 off of every ticket you purchase. And there's no limit to how many tickets you can purchase. You can buy tickets for your kids' entire soccer team. We would love to see you, your kids, and that entire soccer team at the Chicago Toy and Game Fair, November 23rd and 24th at Navy Pier. Ooh, I am so excited. Halloween is just around the corner. That means that we are starting off a really important week. It's Bat Week. And we have a wonderful guest for you today. I'm really impressed. You know, I get to speak to all these really, really wonderful authors, and they're really super, super, super smart and way more intelligent than I am. But today, talk about being out of my league. We have a PhD candidate and a bat expert. Her name is Kristen Lear. Kristen, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm excited.
I am excited too. Not too long ago, I was running around social media and I came upon Kristen's, it was either her Twitter page or her Facebook page, but it just fascinated me. Here's this young woman who is committed to working to save bats and educate people about bats. And I think that's so really, really cool. And you're doing something that most people are absolutely terrified of. You're spending lots of time with bats.
Yeah. It's a fun job, I have to say.
Tell me, how in the world did you get into this?
Yeah, so I actually got started at a really young age. I have always really been drawn to the underdog, so lots of things that people tend to fear or misunderstand, like snakes and spiders, and also bats. So even when I was a kid, I was just really fascinated by bats. I read the book Stella Luna, which is about a little baby bat that gets separated from her mom, and it follows her journey. And yeah, I read that as a kid and just was really interested. And then in sixth grade, for my Girl Scout Silver Award project, I built and put up bat houses in a local park in my hometown. And so that was my first kind of hands-on introduction to bat conservation, and since then it's been a lifelong passion.
Well, there's so many things to talk about in that first 2 minutes of our conversation. First off, parents, I hope you heard a children's book ignited a passion in Kristen that has lasted her entire lifetime and that she is building a career on. So we always talk about how valuable the time that we spend reading with our kids is. And this is a great example of it. Stella Luna changed your life.
Yeah, it did. It really did.
The other thing I want to talk about is while other, and I don't mean just girls, but other girls and boys are building bird houses for cute little birds, you're out building bat houses. Tell us what a bat house is and why in the world somebody would want to build it.
Yeah, so basically a bat house is kind of like a bird house. You know, you put it up to get the bats to live there and to provide a home for them. And it kind of looks like a kind of bird house, but with an open bottom that the bats can like crawl up into. And they're really fun to make. I have actually helped some Girl Scout troops and other kids build bat houses from kits and put them up. So they're really easy to do. And we like to actually have bats around because bats eat a lot of insects. Mm-hmm. So if you put up a bat house, you can attract the bats to your yard or your school or wherever, and those bats will then eat some of those nasty pest insects that we don't like mosquitoes or pests that will eat your garden, things like that. So we really, if you put up a bat house, you can help reduce those insect populations, and it's a kind of a win-win for both us and the bats.
Yeah. I was sharing with Kristen, we don't, I have to say, we don't have a bat house in our backyard on our property, but we don't seem to need one because we have lots and lots of bats flying around our backyard at night, at dusk. We're out on the deck or on the pool, and we see, literally, we see dozens and dozens of bats flitting around, and we're really happy that they're eating those mosquitoes because there's also a lot of those in the backyard. But it's also fascinating watching the way they fly because it's certainly not like watching a bird fly. It's really kind of erratic and beautiful. It's kind of like watching somebody dance. Yeah,
I love watching bats. I mean, it's like an acrobatic show in the sky. Just flitting around, and that's actually one of the things that drew me to them. When I was in Girl Scouts, we would go on night hikes, and we would try to, listen to and hear all the things in the night, and of course bats are one of those things. And so just watching them fly around and hearing their little calls, I fell in love with it.
Mm. I think my first encounter, I grew up in the city, and we had heard of bats, and of course we heard of vampires. But I think my first encounter with the bat was probably third or fourth grade. One made the unfortunate mistake of flying into our classroom, and oh my goodness. I mean, the kids freaked out, but also the adults freaked out too. And, and it was really... I felt bad because the bat didn't come to a good end.
Oh no!
The teachers got involved, and the custodians got involved, and there were sticks, and as I'm looking back now, it certainly wasn't necessary. Yeah. Why do you think bats have this? Why are people so afraid of bats?
I think it's kind of two different things that are related. One is that they're out at night. Most bats are completely nocturnal, so they fly around at night. And so we don't really have experience with them like we do with birds. Mm-hmm. We see birds flying around during the day, and so they're not scary to us. They're not mysterious. And then also the media really kind of tends to put a bad light on bats. Mm-hmm. So movies, anything, vampires, and if you want to make a movie a scary movie or a scene a scary scene, a lot of times you'll put bats, flying out at the person. And again, it kind of perpetuates that myth that they're scary. But they're not. They're just like any other little animal. There's nothing to be afraid of. So I think that's a big problem, and that's kind of why a lot of education and a lot of what I do is trying to talk to people about bats and how cool they are.
Now, I think one of the things I kind of remember from my childhood and, all the warnings of all the adults and telling us why we don't want to be around bats and why they're dangerous. I think one of the things they said was that bats carry rabies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a common, it is true. Bats, just like any mammal, can have rabies, but it's no more likely to be in a bat than it is a raccoon or a fox, or other mammals that are wild. And so they estimate that less than 0.5% of bats have rabies. So it's a really, really small percentage. So yeah, it's nothing to be afraid of. And it is something that, it is a serious thing if you do get it. And so that's why with any wild animal, if you find a wild animal or, a bat on the ground, or if it looks sick or injured, definitely don't touch it. That's best precautions. But in general, they're no more likely to have rabies than other mammals, really.
Now, I've been learning a lot. It's amazing. I feel like, now that I'm closing in on being 100 years old, I feel like I'm learning so much more now than I did when I was in school. But one of the things, I was reading this thing, it was fascinating. My wife and I are exploring Central America these days, and we're having a real fun time, and we're looking forward to going down to South America. But I was reading something that at one time, bat guano, the droppings, it was I don't know if commodity is the right word, but it was really valuable.
It is, and actually it still is. So bat guano people will collect from under the roosts where the bats are sleeping, or from caves, and they'll sell it because it is a great fertilizer. It's really good for gardens, and so people will buy it. And I think you can definitely still get it on the internet or, some organic stores. It's definitely still a thing. That's
wild. We've had some fun experiences with bats. My wife and I have done a lot of exploring. We've done a lot of exploring of some cave systems down in Puerto Rico. And
cool.
One of the things about these cave systems, in addition to being fascinating and kind of mysterious and fun to explore, is that they're usually filled with bats. And I remember being on a guided tour, and they kind of pointed down this one hole, and they said, look down there, there's about 1 million bats down there.
Wow.
And one of the people on our tour, this big hulking Adonis-like god creature from Australia, I think he was a surfer, came up behind my wife and just made this little noise in my wife's ear, and she flipped out because she thought all 1 million of them were coming up. But tell us where are bats? Obviously, the bats can be found in the caves of Puerto Rico. Are they everywhere?
Yeah, so bats, that's one cool thing about bats is that they are on every continent except Antarctica. So you can literally find bats like anywhere. Even in Alaska and Siberia, there's bats there too. And so I think some of the cool places, there's a handful of really neat places in the U.S. Where you can see bats. One of them is the Congress Avenue Bridge in Austin, Texas. This is an amazing tourist attraction. So there's a bunch of Mexican free-tail bats, about 1 to 1.5 million, that roost underneath the main bridge in Austin. And people will come from all over the country and all over the world to watch them come out during the evenings in the summer. So it's a really cool experience. And then also Bracken Cave in Texas near San Antonio is another really cool place. It has 15 to 20 million Mexican free-tail bats. It's the largest bat colony in the world, and being there is kind of a surreal experience. I mean, it's like being in a bat tornado. They're just flying around you, and you can hear them, and you can feel the breeze from their wings, and it's just amazing. So if you ever get a chance, definitely check those places out.
Now, what about all those stories that we heard growing up that sometimes bats will get caught up on your hair, and that's one thing you need to be worried about?
Yeah, that is one of those myths about bats. So what happens is usually if bats are flying around you, it's because they're either checking you out because they're curious, just like any other animal, like a dog or a cat. They're curious and want to see what's around them. So they're just kind of checking you out. And also, the bats that we have here in the U.S. for the most part are insect-eating bats. And so those ones will be flying around you to eat the insects like the mosquitoes that are flying around you. And so they're not, trying to attack you or anything. They're actually probably trying to eat their own food. Yeah, and so, there definitely, I'm sure, are instances of bats getting, accidentally falling on somebody. But that's probably because they were the pups or the baby bats that were learning how to fly. And so they weren't very good at flying. So that's probably why, that would happen.
Yeah. And I imagine, too, that if there's a human being, a large human being, and a small bat is flying around trying to eat the mosquitoes, that's annoying the human being, and the human being freaks out and starts flailing about, it wouldn't be good for either the human being or the bat.
Exactly. And then the person will say, I was attacked by a bat. And I say, no, not quite. So, that's one of those bat myths.
Now, you were talking about that one colony in Texas having 15 to 20 million bats.
Yeah.
Do we have an estimate as to how many bats there are in the world, and how many bat species are there?
Yeah, so that's a great question about how many individual bats there are. I have no idea. Millions and millions and millions, billions of bats around the world. And then for species of bats, they actually just we've been discovering bats, different species for a long time. So the number is now 1,406 bat species right now around the world. So it's a lot.
Wow. Now, I'm just fascinated by this. Now, we see different dogs, we can see St. Bernard is running around with a beagle and things like that. Do different bat species interact with each other, or are they just, do they never come in contact with each other because they are in different parts of the world?
So they do actually come in contact with each other. A lot of times in a roost, like in a cave or, in a tree, you might have several different bat species roosting in the same spot, or in the same cave. But a lot of times they will kind of have their own little spots within the roost for their own species. But they definitely can interact, and they do. So they do live together.
Wow. Do you have a favorite bat species?
I get asked that a lot, and it's hard because they're all so cool. But I think the one that I'm studying right now, the Mexican long-nosed bat, is one of my favorites because I can really relate to it. They are nectar feeders, so they feed on the nectar of things like agave plants that we use to make tequila. And so they have a really big sweet tooth, just like I do. I have a huge sweet tooth. I love anything sugar, and so I kind of relate to them on that level. And then also they're not the most graceful bats. When you watch them feeding on the nectar of flowers, they kind of are clumsy when they're flying around near the nectar. And so I tend to be fairly clumsy, so I, again, really relate to them. And they're really cute. They kind of have little dog-like faces, and they're really, really cute.
This is wild. Now, as you were talking about this bat and why you love it, I'm curious what did bats evolve from? Do we know?
Yeah, so there's a whole field of study into that, but some of the things have proposed that they were kind of from rodents, but we since know that they actually are not from rodents. But they actually are fairly closely related to things like shrews, and also to primates. They're not. They actually have the same kind of bones in their wings that we have in our arm. So some of the anatomy is very similar to primates, which is pretty cool.
That's fascinating. Now, How can kids and we talked a little bit about building bat houses. Are there other ways that kids and parents can come together to help bats?
Yeah, so bat houses is a great thing to do to help the bats. But another thing you can do if you garden in your house or your school has a garden is you can plant night blooming flowers and have a night garden. And so what happens is the night blooming flowers will attract nocturnal insects that the bats will then eat. So you'll kind of have your own little ecosystem in your yard helping the bats with these night blooming flowers. Another cool thing you can do, it's really easy to do, is what's called adopt a bat. You don't actually get a bat, you're not actually adopting a bat, but some of the bat organizations have this program where you donate however much money, and then you're basically sponsoring a bat, so you get information about the species, or if it's a rehabilitation center that takes care of injured bats, you'll get information about the specific bat that you're helping rehabilitate. And so this is a really easy thing to do if you're like in a scout troop or as a class. You can raise money to adopt a bat. It's kind of a fun way to help out.
Yeah.
And then, I think one of the also easiest and best ways to help is to talk to your friends and family about bats, how cool they are, why you think they're neat, just to, again, kind of spread that positive PR about bats. And so it can kind of change our mindset about bats and make them more positive among the public.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's I've mentioned here on the show a lot. Readingville is this beautiful little neighborhood in the city of Boston, but we're on the southwest corner, and we border a beautiful wildlife sanctuary. So this city boy, this kid who grew up in the inner city, is now surrounded by wildlife, and it's fascinating how nature kind of takes care of itself. In my the studio here is in our basement, and there are a few spiders that crawl around the basement. Even though it's finished and there's lights and equipment and all that stuff, we have some spiders, and we actually welcome them because there was these nasty wasps built a nest.
Oh no!
And right outside our entrance to the basement, and a couple of wasps came down, and we were a little bit worried, but they didn't last very long down here. They quickly got tied up in the spider webs, and no more wasps.
Oh no! It's like your own little ecosystem, right?
I know, it's kind of wild. People listening going, I never want to visit that studio.
Yep.
So what can we find?
It sounds cool to me.
It's cool to me, too. I was really worried. I'm like, what am I going to do? How am I going to get these wasps out of the house? And it's all of a sudden like, Sophia's spider is eating the wasp.
Oh, no.
I'm really fascinated that all these things that you're doing, and there's so much. I think talking about bats, it's just a great way to talk to our kids about nature and helping them become aware of nature. And just talk a little bit about that. Why do you think it's so important for kids to be aware not only of bats, but how nature works and how the different species interact with each other and interact with us?
I think it's so important for everyone to have an understanding of how the world works. And I think being out in nature and learning about animals and ecosystems is just a really great way to get kids to think about the connections that are all around us. Our world is very, very connected now, especially with the internet and, planes. We can travel around the world. And learning about the environment is just a really great way to get kids to think about that, how everything really is connected. And of course, I think bats are a great way to do that just because bats are so important for the environment and for us. And so they're a great tool to use, I think, to teach kids about these connections.
I think, too, as our kids become more aware of nature and how nature works and how one thing keeps another thing in check and you know, kind of solves problems. I think it could inspire our kids as they get older, and we're encouraging kids to check out STEM fields, and it might help them in imagining solutions to problems that they are going to encounter in their lives.
Exactly. And it's, you know, you don't have to be, you know, a conservationist or an ecologist to benefit from learning about nature and the natural world. I think it just primes your mind to thinking about how things are connected and how, you know, a solution can be found from nature or just from your own critical thinking.
Mm-hmm. Now, before I ask you about your website, because your website is way cool, and I think families are going to really, really love checking it out. What's next for Kristen Lear? You're about to be. Next time we talk, I'm going to have to call you Dr. Lear. But what's next for you? What are you hoping to do with this vast knowledge of bats?
So bats are my passion. It's my working with bats and protecting bats is my lifelong passion. So I definitely want to continue in this field. And my dream is to work for a nonprofit organization that works on bat conservation and doing hands-on conservation work. And also a huge thing for me is doing outreach and education with kids and adults, really everyone about bats. And so, yeah, my dream career is to marry those two together, the actually doing conservation projects and doing education. And that would be living the dream.
Yeah. Well, I guess I should ask, with, you know, 15 to 20 million bats in one colony down in Texas, are there any species that are in danger right now?
Oh, yeah. So there's a lot of bat species around the world that are endangered for many different reasons. You know, they're losing their habitat. They're being persecuted by people who misunderstand them. There are some diseases that affect the bats that are actually wiping out populations here in the U.S. It's called white nose syndrome. So yeah, there's a lot of issues, and there are many species that are endangered, which is why, again, I want to dedicate what I do in my life to helping protect them.
Well, let's find out about your website, because I have a feeling it's being on your website is going to ignite a lot of really fun times with families, but it also could ignite a young person's new passion for bats.
Yeah. So I'm still working on my website. It's still a work in progress, but having my website has been a way to reach more people than I can reach one-on-one. Mm-hmm. I love hearing from people who are interested in bats. I love to help classes or scout troops with bat house projects or, you know, their own bat projects. And so it's been a great way for me to connect with more people.
Great. And the web address is kristenlear.wixsite.com?
Yeah, so let me double check. Yeah, it's kristenlear.wixsite.com/bat conservation.
Excellent. And where else can folks connect with you online?
Yes, so I'm on social media. I'm on Twitter at Bats4Life. And also on Instagram at Bats4Life_Kristen. So I try to, obviously, as the name implies, talk about bats and post pictures of bats and my, you know, pictures of my work. So it's mostly, bat related.
Well, I am so happy that somehow I found you on I think it was Twitter, it might be Instagram.
Yeah, I think so.
But I'm so happy that I reached out to you, because this has been a fascinating conversation, and I think we just scratched the surface. I think there's so much out there about bats and so much about our world that bats can introduce us to.
Exactly. And I will be posting more information on my website about educational resources about bats. So definitely check that out if you're a parent or a teacher who want to do bat crafts or bat activities with your kids. There's a lot of great resources on the internet. So I'll be linking to a lot of those on my website.
Would it be cheesy if I said, pick up your bat phone and go to Kristen's website?
No, not at all. Not at all.
We have had such a great time speaking to bat expert and bat conservationist Kristen Lear. Kristen, thanks so much for being part of our show.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. This was great.
Please be sure to join us for the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be the producer of the Chicago Touring Game Fair, Mary Cousins. She's going to be telling us all about that fantastic event and much, much more. So you don't want to miss that. If you're the author of a fantastic children's book, we would love to have you on the show being a guest. It's fun, it's easy, and it gives you the chance to tell thousands of people about your great children's book. Just go to readingwithyourkids.com, click on the contact button, let us know about your great book. We will let you know the next easy steps. I want to thank the folks who made today's show so very, very wonderful. Of course, we want to thank Kristen Lear. Be sure to check out her website and talk to your kids about bats. I want to thank my amazing producer, Fatima Khan, for all she does. Check out her blog at readingwithyourkids.com. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. I want to thank Augie the doggy for having my back down here in the studio. And, of course, I want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And, as always, thank you so much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.